Dave, it's been an eventful season. We've proven and disproven so much. We've touched upon the Loch Ness Monster, Flat Earth Theory, Halloween candy, just to name a few. But today, I think we're going to be touching upon a subject that might be the most crucial and controversial of all the topics we've spoken about so far.
What is that?
Let me put it this way, Dave. We're going to talk about a little moon we call the moon. That's right. We're talking about moon landing theories here on Fiction
Or nonfiction.
Fiction
Or nonfiction.
Dave, this is the season finale of Fiction or Nonfiction. Seasons are very arbitrary because we don't go on a play schedule.
No, and you can listen to these episodes anytime you wish.
That's right. You're probably listening to it right now, either on our Spotify channel or perhaps even on our YouTube page. However you do, please enjoy and check out some of our other great podcasts, including our one on Windsor history that's actually performed by Erica, Carla, and Mary Lou, who do a fantastic job. And in the interim, until we have more episodes for another season, keep listening to that because it's fantastic. And they definitely talk about less, polarizing topics than what we tend to do. But on this episode, I wanted to take us out to space. I wanted us to look at that big, beautiful orb in the sky and go, did we land on you? We're talking about the moon landing controversy.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. So, Dave, let's have a little preamble. What do you know about these said controversies happening around moon landings?
A lot of people say it was filmed in a lot and then broadcast on TV, like at a film studio, and it didn't actually happen. I'm sure there's more theories to that, but I think that's the primary one.
Basically, that's true. So, moon landing conspiracy theories exist, and they are conspiracy theories. Let's keep that in mind. They persist, saying that the moon landings that have been recorded and taken place over the years were fabricated. They allege one of two things. Either, as you said, these were recorded in studio somewhere and we never actually landed on the moon, or that maybe we did jettison people into space, but we didn't quite land on the moon as depicted in the footage from the various Apollo missions that are iconic at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So these theories have focused on a lot of perceived gaps or inconsistencies in the historical records. And unlike many other conspiracy theories, which tend to face unanimous ridicule, there's actually been an uptick in support for the fake moon landing conspiracy theories. So
even with all the current moon landing things that have been going on in the last 10 years?
Supposedly, this is on an uptick. Well, certainly, if you go online, the discourse is there. And there's obviously a backlash from scientists, from supporters of the status quo saying the moon landings did happen. Your conspiracy theories ought to be debunked. So before we get into it, let's just kind of give our own thoughts about it. Dave, what do you think about the moon landing? Did we actually land on it?
I think we made one small step for man, one large step for landing on the moon.
That's beautiful. That's like poetry. Did you just make that up?
I sure did, and it was quite awful. But I do think we did land on the moon. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of disinformation out there, let's be honest. But I think there's enough there to prove that it happened, and that's what I think.
Okay, and I'll just put it out there. I agree with you. I have no inkling that the moon landing never happened or that it was fabricated. To put it bluntly, I don't see there being a reason as to have fabricated the moon landing, but we're going to discuss this today, really focusing on whether NASA landed on the moon in 1968. And we're going to see if there's any truth to these conspiracy theories, because I do want to give a little bit of leeway, even though I may not agree with the conspiracy theories. Maybe there's something to them, and we should examine that. And we're really going to examine 5 major facets, basically the 5 tenets of why people believe that it's all conspiracy, that NASA never actually shot someone into orbit so they could land on the moon.
Okay, let's get some information out there. And before we get started, what are some of the places that you're getting this information from?
Well, I'm actually going to source the information as I go through it.
Okay.
But a lot of it is going to be, as we always talk about, through reputable sources. So these are going to be organizations with data you can find online. And I'm also going to be listing some books which can be borrowed from the Windsor Public Library. This information has been fact-checked and has been peer-reviewed to ensure authenticity of what has been published. With that said, though, even though this is a podcast, I'm going to start off with a visual aid.
Okay.
What do you see in that photograph, David?
I see a shadow of someone. It looks kind of like an astronaut, and a cratery surface that looks kind of like the moon.
Okay, so this is a very famous photo. For those who are listening to the podcast edition and don't see the video version of this, it is the iconic photo of one of the astronauts looking down at his shadow, and you can kind of see what looks like an antenna of some sort of equipment that are converging in their angle.
Yes.
So why do you think this photo might be controversial and elicit some sort of skepticism from the fake moon landing advocates?
It's not really clear. Like, I could see some people saying, oh, that's just a desert or something in the nighttime, or that's just dirt on the ground. Mm-hmm. Although it's pretty funny looking dirt. But anyways.
It's moon dust.
Moon dust.
So, okay, this is a photo of Neil Armstrong, probably the most famous astronaut of all time. As you see in the photo, Neil Armstrong and the shadow of this antenna or piece of equipment kind of converge together. Now, the shadows are not parallel. That's why they're converging. So this has led many conspiracy theorists to claim that these images were created using multiple light sources on some sort of film set or a soundstage, potentially.
Okay.
So they argue that the shadows would be parallel if the sun were the only light source. What's your thought on that?
You're in space.
Well, that is true, unless you're not.
The light source is different. I don't know. I don't have a direct answer for that.
Okay. I will say, of all the theories, this was the only one I raised my eyebrow slightly.
You raised your eyebrow.
Yeah.
You raised your eyebrow.
I really did. And that's because I thought, well, there could be something to it. I guess, just going by the laws of physics and what we know about optics, that should be the case. But it turns out that's not true. Converging shadows are actually a well-known optical phenomenon in photography, and artists have actually used these for centuries. The effect that we're seeing in this photograph here is caused by several factors, including the perspective of the camera, the way the surface is inclined to the relative angle of the camera itself, and the light source, which, as you mentioned, would be the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But in addition, and I think this is really crucial, a light source placed close to the objects would not create converging shadows. It would create diverging shadows.
I see.
So just to illustrate this for any listeners out there who might be wondering what that means, basically if you put two light sources close to an object, the shadows will not converge. They will not come towards each other. The way the light will work is it will actually cast diverging shadows, so they'll actually be heading away from one another. So even if you did want to believe that this was recorded on some sort of stage or set, if you were using multiple light sources, these shadows would not be at the angle that they're in as they're depicted in the photo.
Mm-hmm.
Also, here's the other thing. Multiple lights would create multiple shadows.
That's true. And also, maybe these people that are saying this don't do photography.
And that's the other thing, too. We did talk about on our previous episode copypasta, where people basically see a block of text and share it because they think, oh, that sounds right, but they don't fact check. They don't see if it's authentic. And if you don't have a base of knowledge to say, oh, this goes with the laws of photography or goes against, the physics of light within photography, you're just not going to know.
Yeah.
So that pretty much debunks that aspect.
Okay.
That information was taken from the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. We're going to go
Very
to...
good.
Yeah, we're very good. Now, we're going to go to number 2. Astronauts shouldn't be alive.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, the astronauts could not have survived the Earth's radiation field.
Why?
That's a good question. So I love the name of this. It's a radiation belt surrounding the Earth. It's called the Van Allen radiation belt. So This is a zone in our magnetic field that it confines high-energy particles released from the sun. In layman's terms, it's highly radioactive. So conspiracy theorists have argued the astronauts should not have been able to survive passing through these radiation levels.
But how did they get that idea?
What idea?
That there's radiation surrounding the Earth.
Oh, there is. That is like a fact.
Well, you know what
That's
I mean.
a rock fact.
But you know what I mean. Like, where are they getting this, and where is it coming distorted?
Oh, like where are they getting the fact that this should be a dangerous level of radiation?
Yeah.
Very good question. So
But a ship's going, like a spaceship is going through the atmosphere, not a person.
it's not somebody's naked body being flung through this belt. It is someone encased
in a giant metal spaceship. Yes.
Exactly. And then even then, it's not like they're hanging out there, on like a lazy river, just like relaxing. No, this is someone who is just being shot right through the radiation belt. In fact, the transit time through the Van Allen belt was very incredibly short. As well, you have to consider the dispersal of radiation among the vessel, the short time the astronauts were going through there. Passing through this region, basically everyone is saying the radiation levels would not be fatal. It would not even be harmful to the astronauts. And so James Van Allen, who the radiation belt was named after because he discovered it, publicly rebutted these claims that the radiation levels were harmful for the Apollo astronauts. There we go. The very person whose namesake the belt was taken after, he's refuted these claims. And there's plenty of other scientists, including an astronomer named Phil Plait, who calculated that the average dose of radiation an Apollo astronaut received in this journey would be equivalent to the ambient radiation received by living at sea level for 3 years.
And where did you get that information?
Okay, so this information, actually I should say that last quote in particular, was taken from a book by Phil Plait titled Bad Astronomy. You can borrow it at Windsor Public Library. He does talk a lot about various conspiracy theories regarding space travel and the Apollo missions. There's also more information about the Van Allen radiation belt taken from clavius.org, from NASA, and the Image Science Center.
Should we say that, what was the name of the astronomer that did bad astronomy?
Oh, that's Phil Plait.
Would you say his plate is full with information?
No.
Okay.
So, conspiracy theory number 2, debunked. Let's go to conspiracy theory number 3.
You said there's how many?
5.
Okay.
Are you tired? Did you need a soda?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Yes.
This next one's going to require more photographic information for Dave. Remember, you can check us out on our YouTube page where you will be able to see some accompanying images.
Okay. So what is this?
You tell me.
It looks like an astronaut going grocery shopping.
You got it. Good night, folks.
But no, there's an astronaut carrying 2 very large, it looks like square packs. Like, I don't know what they are, though. And he's walking on a cratery surface.
So, at first glance, you wouldn't think there's anything controversial about this photo.
Yeah.
Is there anything you see missing?
Well, the sky is just pitch black.
Exactly.
But I guess it depends when it was taken and how it was taken.
Well, here's the thing. This is where conspiracy theory number 3 comes into play. There are no stars in any of the pictures of the NASA moon landings. So, conspiracy theorists argue that the lack of stars in all these photographs prove that the event had to be staged. NASA could not have faked the full wonder of the lunar sky, and so they simply chose not to include any stars at all as the backdrop to these photographs, and that's an argument.
But this was what year was this again? 1968?
Yep.
Did they have cameras that could capture that much detail back then?
Well, arguably yes.
But in that environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's use our little detective brains on this. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. Let's use your large detective brain.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And when do we see stars?
If you get hit really hard.
Usually then, yes. But when else will you normally see stars?
Usually at a certain time of night. And they're not always visible. For example, just the other day, I was looking up in the night sky and I was like, I don't see any stars. But the next day, at a different time, later, I did see stars.
So even in an instance when you're on Earth, there are times when you're going to look up and not see stars, but you hit it on the head with this one. At night. What time do you think this photo was taken?
I don't know. Is space-time different than Earth time?
I mean, technically, if you go by the laws of relativity, yes. But this was essentially where the lunar cycle allowed the sun to hit the surface of the moon. So we would call that
An eclipse.
day.
Oh.
So quite the opposite. I mean, if we were from Earth, definitely.
Okay. That's what I meant, I think.
I think so, too. Okay, so the lunar landscape in these photographs is lit by the sun. It is so cold when the sun is not shining on the surface of the moon, the astronauts would not actually be out on the surface at that time. That's why we actually see shadows and we see objects illuminated.
So it's space nighttime.
It's space daytime.
Space daytime.
Yeah, so quite the opposite of what you just said.
But also these photos that are being taken, there's also a light coming from the ship. Wherever, like this camera, like they have to have some sort of light as well, right?
Yeah. And let's also just keep in mind, faint objects like stars are not going to appear in a brightly lit photograph because they're going to be drowned out by the other light source. And what light source do we have here? The sun.
I think it's a little bright.
It's a little bright, isn't it? So since the camera's shutter speed needs to be fast and its aperture incredibly small in order to capture such sort of imagery, it simply was not able to capture the stars. And then subsequently, we are able to see through satellite images and other video feeds of people traveling in space. Yes, indeed, they were able to capture imagery of stars in the sky. So this theory has been debunked. You know, it's like saying, well, there's no stars in the sky when you take a picture during noontime, so therefore stars don't exist. No, that doesn't mean that.
What about the noon stars?
Oh, God. Anyway, Dave, I'm going to pretend you didn't say that, and instead just acknowledge that, yes, I did have some great sources from this.
Oh, yes. Where did you get your star sources?
So there is a great book I would recommend by David Woods. It's titled How Apollo Flew to the Moon. It gives a lot of technical information, can get a little bit dry sometimes with these details, but does give great information explaining the science behind how Apollo was able to launch these astronauts and launch these shuttles into space. Then there's also an article that was actually blown up into a full-length book we do have here at Windsor Public Library. It's titled 50 Popular Beliefs People Think Are True by Guy Harrison. Are you ready for theory number 4?
I can't wait.
You're going to love this because it's another image-based one.
Oh, great. The listeners can see it too.
A very iconic photo I'm showing you.
Yep. It's an astronaut standing on what looks like the moon, and then the American flag is planted, and he's just kind of looking at it.
Yep. Obviously, this is a photo of the first day MTV ever launched.
MTV Raps?
Yep.
Oh, damn.
Yo.
But anyways, yes, no, it's very iconic. They went to the moon. They put the American flag on the moon. Mm-hmm. And then there was a lot of photos taken of it.
So just taking an educated guess, what would conspiracy theorists question about this particular photo? Is there anything about the flag itself?
Yeah, maybe because the flag has like a stick on the top. If you look, like it's holding it in place or something.
Well, look at the state of the flag itself. Is it perfectly rectangular?
Not really. And also the posture of the astronaut is not perfect as well.
Well, there's that, but, nothing against Buzz Aldrin. You definitely,
I'm not
you're in zero gravity, so.
I'm not insulting his posture.
You just did. Anyway.
I'm sorry, Buzz.
Sorry, you're a national hero, and Dave just insulted you. Anyway.
I love Buzz.
Buzz Cola?
Let's move on.
So, yes, it is the famous picture of Buzz Aldrin. He's saluting the American flag, and theorists state the issue with this is that the flag is ruffled. It looks unsettled, as if it's flapping in the wind.
Because it's on the moon, there's no wind on the moon?
There's no wind. There's no atmosphere in the moon. So, therefore, nothing should be billowing or blowing like a flag does here as it ruffles in the wind. It should just be perfectly static.
Okay.
So, there's no wind, there's no atmosphere, the flag should not be waving, therefore this is a fake photo. What do you make of that claim?
I don't think so. But tell me why
Okay, so
and how you found it.
it's funny because unwittingly, you actually pointed to the very thing that debunks this.
Oh, okay.
So you did talk about how there's apparently a rod at the very top of the flag.
Because normally a flag, it's just one like pole or rod, and then they attach the flag on the top, and that's it. But this one, it has that, but at the very top of the flag, it looks like there's another little stick holding the top of the flag in place.
And that's exactly what it is. It's an L-shaped rod, and this was actually meant to help just hold the flag up for visibility for photographs. It's a telescopic pole that extends along the top of the flag that's actually used to give the illusion as if it's flying. This produces the illusion that the flag is waving in the wind, and the wrinkles themselves on the flag, because people can look at it and go, yeah, it does look pretty ruffled. They're just wrinkles. The flag was folded in a storage bin during the journey. And because, zero gravity, they can't exactly iron it out and make it look perfectly flat. The ruffles, the wrinkles in the flag are mistakenly seen as movement in this photograph. It's an optical illusion. And then you can see time-lapse examinations of these photos showing Buzz Aldrin in just slightly different positions, and the flag remains the same. So there is no wind. The flag is stationary. It's static in that wrinkled state.
They didn't bring a space iron?
I don't think they had the technology for that yet.
Okay.
Maybe it was the next Apollo mission they had that.
Okay.
So I did reference a book earlier. This was actually referenced in this book, 50 Popular Beliefs People Think Are True by Guy Harrison. And also, I mentioned a website previous, clavius.org. I got my information about this from those sources. And then the final conspiracy theory is the big one, the one I know you know a little bit about, the alleged Stanley Kubrick involvement.
Yeah, so when they broadcast the first moon landing on TV, people say that it was done. Yeah, they say Stanley Kubrick shot it in a film studio.
And why do they say that?
I don't know.
Well, what movie did he do?
Oh, he did Space 2001.
Yeah. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Groundbreaking special effects at the time. Still holds up to be a pretty darn good watch right now. Again, it can be borrowed from the Windsor Public Library, and I do encourage people who have not seen it before to check it out. It is one of my favorite science fiction movies. With that said, because of the advanced special effects in this movie, people said, well, there's a lot of commonalities between what we see in this movie, especially the scenes that are shot on a moon, and the type of imagery we see during the Apollo moon landing footage. So therefore, it must have been Stanley Kubrick.
So they're saying because they saw a really well-done movie with scenes on the moon, that therefore that is the reason why this is not real.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense.
So, okay, consider this. No evidence has ever been offered to support this theory.
Okay.
Like, I don't even know what else I need to say. The only tenuous connection between NASA and Kubrick himself was that he hired two people who worked for NASA as consultants on 2001: A Space Odyssey, but he hired them for very particular purposes. There's lots of documentation showing what they consulted on. That's it. There's no other paper trail connecting Kubrick to NASA.
Did anyone ever ask Stanley about it?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up.
Okay.
In 2015, there was a video that surfaced online. I think you know where this is already heading. So this interview was allegedly depicting Kubrick shortly before his 1999 death, confessing that he faked the Apollo moon landings.
Okay. And what's your...
Oh, it was a hoax. It turned out it was like just a fabrication. It was just a doctored video.
Deep fake.
Very deep fake. So, we did ask, why would people believe this? Well, there is an origin for this. This takes place all the way back on 1995's Usenet. Do you remember Usenet?
No.
I think it's a little bit before our time, but basically it's kind of a forum where people were able to post all sorts of extraneous things, and there was an article posted titled Stanley Kubrick and the Moon Hoax. So this is what really blew up the theory, which is why you never really heard about it prior to 1995, but thereafter it gained a lot of traction. Now, the article itself is a categorical fabrication. It contains lots of claims and information that conflicts with facts about Kubrick's life, including the fact that this article references a brother of Kubrick's that he never existed. He was never born.
He never had a brother.
No, they just made it up. And then there's also things to keep in mind, like the film itself. The lunar surface, it differs very much so from the footage from the Apollo missions, and then the way that the astronauts move on the moon also differs incredibly from what we saw in the Apollo footage. So if Kubrick was theoretically hired to fabricate this, he's making a much different batch of footage than he did for his actual film.
I'm just going to say, having seen his movies many times, I know you have as well, the quality of the moon landing that was broadcast is not the best. It's coming from the moon, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But if Stanley Kubrick shot the footage, it would look a lot different.
I would say so.
Yeah.
All right, so I think those are the main tenets of this conspiracy theory. We've debunked them, but you know what someone's going to say, though?
What are they going to say?
Well, an advocate for these theories is going to say, yeah, but you didn't prove that they landed on the moon.
Okay, well, let's prove it.
Okay, let's prove it. So let's talk to a NASA employee. Actually, a former scientist and employee from NASA, James Longuski.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Longuski said that these conspiracy theories are impossible because of their size and complexity. Take a guess how many people worked on the Apollo project.
I don't know. Hundreds.
More than that.
Thousands.
400,000 people.
Oh, my.
At various levels, all of them working on the Apollo projects for 10 years. All of these people would have to be involved in the conspiracy, and this involves astronauts, scientists, engineers, technicians, skilled laborers who would all have to keep the secret. To date, nobody from the United States government or NASA linked to the Apollo program ever said the moon landings were faked. And also, when you just think about, on today's online climate, how hard it is to keep a secret, I'm going to say it's not impossible something wouldn't leak. That was actually from an article posited by Jim Longuski. That was 7 Secrets of How to Think Like a Rocket Scientist. So at this point, I'm sure all the people out there thinking, but there's still a possibility that the moon landings could be faked. I mean, they're not actually giving us any evidence to say we did land on the moon. There is actual physical evidence. And that tangible physical evidence are retroreflectors.
What are those?
Okay, well, they're not something you put on the back of your bike so you don't get hit while you're driving at night. These are actual installed pieces of technology that have been embedded onto the lunar surface. So, retroreflectors actually allows observers on Earth to project lasers onto them, and the reflectors to get back imagery and signals from the moon. For example, measuring out the distance of the lunar body from the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll do that in order to take these lunar measurements. But this is only possible because these retroreflectors are installed. That shows the technology on the moon had to have human intervention. There's no way these lasers detecting lunar measurements would be able to work without them. So therefore, indisputably, man has landed on the moon to install these.
Also, I believe, and I didn't look this up, I'm just saying this, but I believe they also did take some like moon rocks, things from the moon as well.
I think they sell those at a greenhouse.
No,
over
like,
there, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they did take some of the planet's surface with them.
No, they did. And there are samples and whatnot. But I think for people who are pro-conspiracy theory, who say anything could be fabricated, these scientists, these astronauts could claim that this is coming from the moon, but, there's no actual evidence to support it. This is it. Yes, we have plenty of evidence in terms of photography. We have plenty of evidence in terms of samples we took back with us. But there's no way we could have those reflectors up there on the moon without us installing them. Therefore, man landed on the moon. And because there is no proof that hasn't been debunked, no offerings of this said conspiracy theory that cannot be immediately dismissed, nor because there's no other explanation of how these instruments magically got embedded into the surface of the moon without human intervention, these fake moon landing conspiracies are fiction.
Okay. Well, that was very in-depth, and there's a lot of great facts there. But I have a side thing I want to discuss that's related to the moon. And I guess we could call it a day fact, but it's not really.
Is it a lunar fact?
Let's say that. It's not really a lunar fact. It's just relating to the moon. So here's a common thing that I'm sure everyone has heard at some point in their life, that the moon is made of cheese. Why do people say that?
Because it's yellow and looks delicious.
Well, I'm going to tell you where this came from and why people say it. So this is actually, I'm assuming people realize that the moon is not dairy. It's not made of cheese.
Is it like a brie? Is it a camembert? Like what sort of? It's not a camembert. Or what sort of cheese is it?
The moon is a planet. It's not food.
So it's not Swiss.
No.
Okay.
But the idea that the moon is made of cheese has been around for a millennia. It's been around a very long time.
Oh.
And it's doubtful that anyone's ever actually really believed it. Well, at least not academically. But the earliest record of this bizarre notion comes from actually an old fable, an old fairy tale, a Slavic fable that a ravenous wolf chases a seemingly hapless fox, hoping to score an easy meal. The fox convinces his pursuer that the moon's reflection on a nearby pond is actually a block of cheese floating on its surface, and the wolf must drink all of the water to acquire the tasty treat, the moon cheese. So, guzzling his way to the prize, the wolf eventually drinks too much and bursts, leaving the fox alive and victorious.
That's interesting because then it's kind of a cautionary tale about believing these fantastical stories.
Yes.
The wolf should have known better. So it's kind of like a warning that if you believe the moon is made of cheese, you're being foolish.
But there's more.
Oh.
So the best known early citation of this moon is made of cheese goes back to 1546. It can be found in the Proverbs of John Haywood, and it's a document about some of the author's most famous sayings.
Huh.
And this author would say things like, the more the merrier, a penny for your thoughts. These are very famous sayings that sometimes people still use. But at one point, it jokingly says that the moon is made of green cheese, green with an E on the end, which is referring to the food's age rather than its color. This is kind of where all this goes back to, an old fable, an old fairy tale. And in 1636, the English natural philosopher John Wilkins wrote, "You may soon persuade some of the country's peasants that the moon is made of green cheese," as we say. And it all kind of goes back to this fable that's been around for a long time that people might not be aware of because it's so kind of embedded into the public subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
But even NASA couldn't resist this joke. On April Fool's Day in 2002, the agency claimed to have proven once and for all that the moon was made of cheese by releasing a photoshopped image with an expiration date printed on one of the moon's craters.
I actually remember that when it came out.
Now, obviously, it was an April Fool's joke, and then they said, yes, this is not real, this is an April Fool's joke. But that's kind of where that comes from. And if you're wondering where I'm getting this information from, there's a very great website that kind of goes in depth into a lot of these things called Mental Floss.
Oh, yes. Mental Floss is really good, and they do source where they get their information
Yes. So this is where I got this from. But if you do a little more searching on the interwebs, you can also find more about the moon is made of green cheese and the fable, even on Wikipedia. As we mentioned earlier, it's kind of a proverb and a metaphor in the fable, but it kind of just spread from there. But also, when I was searching, I found that there actually is a product called moon cheese that you can buy that some company makes. And apparently, it tastes like pepper jack cheese. But this is not
pepper jack cheese, not peppermint cheese.
Peppermint cheese would be
that disgusting. God.
Yeah. But anyways, that's kind of where that saying comes from, and there's more information out there if you want to kind of look into it. It's been around forever. It's just basically sourcing from an old fable that was a cautionary tale.
That is really cool. And, I do want to say, through this entire exploration, it's been a very in-depth episode about the moon. I think we need to consider people who are coming from the perspective of why the moon landing was faked. By and large, it happens to be people who believe in conspiracies, who believe that information is being withheld from the larger populace. And here's my thing. I know certain conspiracies have been validated. There have been efforts by certain governments and organizations to withhold information from the public. But when it comes to stuff like this, we do need to scrutinize, is there a reason? Objectively, is there any purpose to an entity like America trying to fake the moon landing? Obviously, there was the big space race in the 1960s, but even then, that doesn't really justify all of the resources that would be put into faking a moon landing. With that said, this is clearly debunked, and I feel confident that for our next lunar cycle, we can look up there at that big, beautiful ball in the sky and proudly say we had touched ground on that surface. With that said, Dave, I think that just about does it for this season of Fiction or Nonfiction. Before we go, do you have another random Dave fact?
Would you like one?
Sure, why not? Pull one out of your hat.
It's not about moon cheese.
Well, then never mind. No, tell me.
Okay, my question for you is, it's a random fact, so I'm going to ask you, when was this first a thing? The first use of paper money. Was it in the early 17th century? Or was it in, maybe the early 1900s? Or was it later than that?
Definitely 17th century.
You must have read my notes.
I did peer over your shoulder.
The first use of paper money was actually used during the Tang Dynasty in China by the Chinese, who started carrying folding money. And this actually dates back to 1618, 1907 AD.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a long time ago. So it was mostly a private thing. It wasn't like now we get money everywhere. Like if you need paper money, you can get paper money. It was not as easy to get, but that's kind of where the origin of it comes from.
Do you know why it was created?
Do you know why?
Well, basically, it was created as a way to avoid having to write very lengthy, wordy contracts. Instead, you just have this note having this arbitrary amount printed on it so that people would barter or exchange it with one another, and they would have that as kind of like a quick contract for saying, I'm exchanging you so much worth of value, rather than having to actually write out a full contract.
Here's another interesting fact. By the way, I'm getting this information from an article that was published on Time magazine, time.com. Again, a reputable source known for checking their information. Yes, they introduced the paper money, but China actually eliminated paper money in 1455 and wouldn't adopt it again for several hundred years. Another not-so-known fact is world cash was originally used to describe the round bronze coins with square holes commonly used in the Tang Dynasty as kaiyuns. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Probably not. Kaiyuns.
Kaiyuns. K-A-I-Y-U-A-N-S. With that said, there's a little bit of a factoid for you on paper money. We both had some facts for you, and hopefully all you out there enjoyed this Mooney episode.
This Mooney episode and this very, really in-depth, all over the place season we've talked about so much, and I hope we have another season coming up. I am planning to talk, about all of our favorite things, conspiracy theories, cryptoids, urban legends, but until next season, this has been Adam.
And Dave.
And you've been listening to Fiction
or Nonfiction.